Good morning, everyone. It's Sunday, April 19th. We are live this morning with Congressman Richard Neal. Let's go on the record. He quietly holds one of the most powerful positions on Capitol Hill. In a time of crisis, how this congressman from Western Massachusetts is making policy for all of America. Let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
It's 11 o'clock in the morning, and welcome to a live edition of OTR. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Janet Wu. We are live this morning, and we are respecting, as normal, all social distancing protocols. Our guest this morning is Congressman Richard Neal, who really is socially distanced. He's in Springfield right now. He represents the state's 1st congressional district. He is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. He holds one of the most powerful positions on Capitol Hill. He joins us this morning from his home in Springfield. Congressman, great to have you with us. Thank you for your time.
Congressman, thank you for being with us.
Nice to be with the both of you.
I'm going to start with something that's very close to home, a very tough question. The Holyoke Soldiers Home. We understand your uncle is a resident there and that he has been tested positive for the coronavirus. How worried are you?
Well, you have to be worried, but he's doing much better. And I think that in conversations that I've had with his children, he's holding his own. And after all, it's a reminder, he came from a family with 20 uncles and aunts and 5 brothers and a sister. So when I've talked to him regularly, he always reminds me about what hardscrabble really meant. So he's a tough guy.
How alarmed are you about the conditions there at the home?
Well, I'm a regular visitor there, Janet. I've gone there almost monthly. I have a number of constituents, friends, people I've worked with and worked for, and relatives that have been there. So I think you have to be mindful of it, particularly in the Alzheimer's unit, the dementia unit, because if you visit there, quickly you could see that those individuals sit almost on top of each other. So you could see quickly how this infection would spread.
Congressman, as of this morning, 48 deaths from COVID-19. Nearly 70% infected in that specific facility. Does the buck stop with Governor Baker there?
Well, I've talked to the governor about it. He's appointed a special investigator. I know that the U.S. Attorney and the Attorney General, they both are investigating what took place on the site. So I think that we'll have to wait and see. I've been in contact with Mary Lou Sutters. We've spoken about it as well. And it's an interesting concept because while it has to, from time to time, undergo reviews from the Veterans Administration, it really is a state function. And I call attention to that because it's a home, it's a residence. Some people think of it as being a hospital. It's really not. It's where these men and women who serve the country admirably reside.
Congressman, in the bigger picture, about 52% of the COVID-related deaths are from these types of nursing homes and assisted facilities. That's an alarming statistic.
It should be. Recall that even though many of these nursing facilities, they receive Medicaid and Medicare money, nonetheless, they mostly are private entities. They are reviewed by state inspectors from time to time. But again, I think part of it is the challenge of proximity when you have this sort of an infection that is spread so quickly and readily.
Congressman, your negotiations with the Senate on the next relief package appear to be at a standstill. We did hear from the House Speaker this morning, and she says that you're close to reaching an agreement with the Trump administration with the Senate. But the money for the micro-sized businesses on Main Street and hospitals seem to be at odds right now, and the Senate just wants more money for those who already qualify. When will Americans see the money? When will there be an agreement on this next relief package?
I think an agreement is imminent. Janet, I spoke with Secretary Mnuchin for a half hour yesterday morning. I've had a good working relationship. I've made sure of that. As you know, the Ways and Means Committee oversees the Department of Treasury. And at the same time, I spoke with Speaker Pelosi on Thursday at length, Thursday evening about it. So I think an agreement is at hand. I also want to point out that Massachusetts has done pretty well with more than $1 billion in the Paycheck Protection Program. We're putting together, again, a Ways and Means responsibility in terms of unemployment insurance. It was, again, an opportunity to secure a regular cash infusion and flow for people who found themselves out of work. And the other side of it, I think, is our hospitals need the money. So I think the negotiating posture that's been adopted here is not contrary to what we all want. We want more money for small business people. And simultaneously, our hospitals need an infusion of money as well. And the agreement, I think, will reflect that carefully.
And the states, what about the states? Will they get more money? I know that's something the House has been fighting for as well.
We would like to see that happen. I think that can happen in subsequent packages. I also believe that as of yesterday, the Secretary said that he thought that would be difficult to attain in this round of negotiations. I think that the viewer should think of this as really phase 3.5 in terms of implementation, discovering that there were some difficult parts of the rollout, largely because the system has been overwhelmed. 22 million Americans have applied for unemployment insurance. I think that that is the nature of the challenge we face, but at the same time, I think that we also should describe phase 3 as about relief and stability. As we move to phase 4, and I anticipate maybe even as phase 5, that's when we will proceed to real stimulus and recovery.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that you deal directly with the Treasury Secretary, Steven Mnuchin. Do you get the sense that he always has a clear vision of what the president wants?
Well, I always think that's a challenge in this atmosphere. I think that he's very capable. And at the same time, I think that a Secretary of the Treasury, like the Secretary of Health and Human Services and Secretary of Labor that I've spoken to in the last day and a half, we need to be mindful of something, that generally their domain includes enormous responsibility in carrying out function. I think one of the challenges we've had here is that the President has really offered more of a chaotic analysis as to how to proceed. One day the states should oversee the reopening of the economy, and the next day he should oversee it, and the third day it's back to the states. So I think that's reflected as well in terms of how these secretaries, members of the cabinet, try to fulfill their responsibilities every day. It's surely a substantial challenge.
Do you think that he's leading the president on these issues, Mnuchin?
I hope so. I think that he has a long history. And I think that, again, there was broad agreement. As I've talked to former Democratic secretaries of the Treasury and Republican secretaries of the Treasury at length, hours and hours, as to how to proceed. That's how we came up with our negotiating position as Democrats early on. And I must tell you, I think whether it was the Secretary of the Treasury, Bob Rubin, who oversaw the Mexican debt crisis, Henry Paulson, who oversaw the events in the aftermath of 2008, Jack Lew, these individuals have given me good advice for a long period of time, and I must tell you that I think that what we're seeing and witnessing here, again, is that very important influence. You can't make these numbers up. It's a very stubborn part of arithmetic, and we're not going to get the economy reopened until people are convinced and have the confidence that the contagion of the coronavirus has been arrested.
Mr. Chairman, as Ways and Means Chair, you see exactly the details of how this money is being issued and how it's being spent. Do you think that the Trump administration is spending the money as Congress had hoped or had dictated? And more importantly, do you think that there are above board dealings with the states? Because we've been hearing lots of complaints.
Well, Janet, we used, as you know, existing pipelines to try to get the money out the door. So we offered, I thought, speed and balance. And the money largely went through the pipelines of the IRS because people have tax ID numbers that makes it fairly easy to get that money into their hands. The Social Security Administration, Community Development Block Grant funding, all of those have existing pipelines so that the money would flow. Now, we attached a very important caveat to the discretionary fund that the Secretary of the Treasury will oversee. It's $450 billion. We will have Democrats and Republicans and independents who will have a chance to oversee and review how that money is expended, understanding that the use of the public purse here is a very important consideration. I think there'll be ample opportunity for that review to occur.
And what about the states being able to get the equipment that they need? There's a lot of tug of war going on, is there not, between the states and the federal government over PPE?
Yes, and one of the problems that we have here is it's the issue of supply and demand. And I think that what's happened is that the federal government, in some instances, we've created a bit of a bidding war. Now, I've intervened a couple of times to make sure that our hospitals in Western Massachusetts and Central Massachusetts, we're going to receive right now almost $1 billion in the first stage of the $100 billion that was rolled out a week ago Thursday night. Now, part of that is also this understanding that in the first round, again, the existing pipeline we used for these hospitals was their Medicare census. And I intend to make sure that the next round will reflect a Medicaid census, because that will go to the hospitals that are very challenged financially in parts of the state. But I also think the additional $100 billion appropriation is essential as part of the negotiations and agreement.